Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, December 11th, and we have a great show for you today. We got to get to my postseason awards. I want to go through Coach of the Year, the Broyles Award, Joe Moore, obviously the Heisman, and everything in between. Want to give out all of my awards today. Definitely some that were very, very tough to pick, but I got to my answer. Then we'll get to Quinn, Ewers, and Arch Manning. Obviously, a huge debate as we head into this thing is how much should Arch Manning play? Should he just take over the starting job for Texas? A lot of questions around that thing, and I'll break down some of the issues Texas has been facing and how Arch Manning definitely could help out a couple of things that they have been facing. And then we'll get to a coaching carousel updates. Obviously, the big one is around UNC and Bill Belichick. Very interesting headlines coming out yesterday, and we'll break it down. Then we'll get to a huge month ahead. We have a couple of teams that I'm watching very closely in the month of December in the portal, also on the field, to just show that they're ready for a big-time 2025. And then we'll get to quarterback rankings for the CFP. All of these quarterbacks are very, very solid. It was very hard to rank these guys, but I feel pretty good about the 12 that I have right now. But before we jump in, we'll get to that here in a second. Before we do jump in, I want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that, and I can answer whatever question you have on your mind. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, because it is officially the end of the year. We're about to get into the playoff. We're about to get into bowl games. We're about to have Army-Navy here in 2 seconds, but we have to get to official postseason awards because I have a lot of them to get to. We'll roll through these relatively quickly here, but definitely wanted to give you guys an idea of where I stand at the end of all this craziness, at the end of this incredible year. Here's where I'm at, and we'll start with Coach of the Year. There's a lot of guys that should be up for this, if I'm being totally honest. I don't know if they've come out with the official finalists for this, but the way that I see it, you got Deion Sanders, 9-3 in year 2 on the doorstep of the CFP. Came up a little bit short, but the turnaround that he's had at Colorado is just otherworldly. It's been absolutely incredible to watch and has proved a lot of doubters, including myself at certain times, very much wrong this year. Then you do have Kirby Smart, hardest schedule in the country by a pretty comfortable margin. They had injuries all over the place, and they're still SEC champs. It's just a well-oiled machine down there, and frankly, this is probably the best coaching job that Kirby's had since he's been at Georgia, as far as I'm concerned. Kurt Cignetti, insane flip at a program that has not been here, and I don't think anyone was expecting them to be here this time around. They went from 3-9 to 11-1. They're playing incredibly good football, and they're on their way to the playoff for the very first time in program history. Remarkable job by him. Was one of the best stories of the entire year. Dan Lanning also deserved a little bit of love here. In the year that was absolutely chaotic all over the place, he was undefeated. The only undefeated team in the FBS, coached incredibly good football, had some of the best post-game speeches, halftime speeches that you've ever seen. Very, very good head coach. I expect him to be here for a very long time to come. But to me, Kenny Dillingham's the winner. He was picked last in the Big 12 preseason, on his way to a CFP, has done an incredible job. Sam Levitt went down for multiple games. They were able to get Jeff Sims in there, win a couple of games. Cam Scadaboo's been incredible. The job that Kenny Dillingham has done, even under sanctions from the NCAA, from the Herm Edwards era, it's remarkable. It's something that I really did not think I was going to see from Kenny Dillingham. Frankly, when he took that job, I thought it was something of a death sentence. He's turned it into an absolute paradise, and it's been incredible to watch him develop. Really love that coach, and he is the coach of the year as far as I'm concerned. And we'll stay in the coaching realm right here, and we'll go to the Broyles Award. 3 guys have really stood out to me. We have Shannon Dawson, led the #1 scoring offense in the country, #2 in total yards over there at Miami. Obviously, Cam Ward likely on his way to NYC here in a second. Then you do have Jim Knowles, #1 total defense, 13 touchdowns allowed by that defense in the entire year. Remarkable group, a ton of talent on that team, and he utilized it incredibly well. To me, it's Pete Kwiatkowski. It was really remarkable. The #2 scoring defense, #1 in yards allowed per game for that Texas defense, and the turnaround on that back end was insane. They replaced guys like Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy up front, and that back end was a huge issue last year. It was one of the weakest parts of their team. It was the reason that they lost that game to Washington. Now they're one of the best, if not the best back end in the entire country. Remarkable job by him, and as far as I'm concerned, no assistant has done quite a good job as Pete Kwiatkowski has this year with that Texas defense. And now we'll go to the big boys up front. The Joe Moore finalists, I have the same finalists that the Joe Moore committee does, and I feel pretty good about that because those are some very, very smart people that handle that situation. We'll start with Texas. Obviously, those 2 games against Georgia did not go the way that they wanted to by any means, but they did have an elite performance against Michigan, and that elite defensive line really dominated just about anyone that was not named Georgia throughout this year. Was incredible in the run game late. Obviously was one of the better pass pro teams in the entire country. Really, really good unit. Obviously had those 2 tough moments. That's why they're not my winner, frankly. But really, really good unit. Absolutely a unit that could lead them to a national title. Army, only 6 sacks allowed. Number 1 run game in the country. Obviously going to be a good group when you need that triple option to get rolling. That's the group that you're going to want to lean into. An absolutely remarkable unit that has done an incredible job this year. Oregon's the winner to me, though. When I look at this O-line, they've been the most reliable all year. They had a couple of injuries early on, had a couple of injuries late with Matthew Bedford still not in this lineup, but they're playing really good football. They've been an absolute force. They've been able to run the football. The protection for Dylan Gabriel has been absolutely elite all year. Only 13 sacks allowed, 4 given up in the last 6 games, 5 yards per carry for this rush offense. I would give it to Oregon with Army just right behind them. I think that's a team that deserves a lot of respect for what they've done on the offensive line, but for me, Oregon wins this one. I do think they had a best offensive line this year. I think they should be the Joe Moore Award winners. And then we'll move over to the defensive side of the ball. We'll talk about the best defender in the country. And we got 4 dudes right here. There's an absolute unit of players right here. And it's Kyle Kennard, an absolute beast in the inside. 11.5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles, 1 INT. He was all over the place this year. You do have Jahdae Barron, one of the best DBs in the entire country. Had 9 pass breakups, had 5 INTs on the year. Was playing kind of that rover position where wherever Texas needed them, he was going to be there. He was going to be making plays. Abdul Carter, 60 total tackles, 10 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. This guy's an absolute monster. He's someone that could totally explode the playoff and totally take over against a team like Georgia in a possible semifinal and get this team to a possible national title. And then Mason Graham is one of the best defensive tackles I have seen in my lifetime. He is absolute beast. He is all over the place in the inside. He holds down his space, and he just declared for the NFL draft. He is going to be a top 5 pick. I can almost promise you that. But for me, Kyle Kennard takes the cake. He was the game wrecker of the season as far as I'm concerned. I do think Abdul Carter was very, very close for me when I was thinking these through. But the game-wrecking nature of what Kyle Kennard brought, the 5 forced fumbles, the 1 INT, the 11.5 sacks, I just can't overlook it. I would lean Kyle Kennard here. Abdul Carter would be right behind him. It was so close, and definitely one that was tough to make the decision on, but I just think those 5 forced fumbles, those 11.5 sacks give Kyle Kennard just the edge that I would give them over Abdul Carter. Going to the back end of the defense, we have the Jim Thorpe Award, one of the most special awards that has been very prestigious for a very, very long time in college football, and we got some dudes in this one. Caleb Downs came into Ohio State as a very highly rated guy. He has lived up to that hype. 61 tackles, 3 pass breakups, 1 INT. Obviously not necessarily the biggest coverage guy in the world. Can do it, no doubt about that, but isn't necessarily the biggest coverage guy. He is going to fly downhill. He is going to be as good as any DB in the country when it comes to run support. He is absolutely elite in every way, and he's coming back next year. So we'll find out what he can do in his junior season, but definitely a very talented guy. He's just on the outside of the winner as far as I'm concerned. Travis Hunter, the fact that he wasn't a finalist for the Thorpe Award in real life is outright insane, so I'm going to make him a finalist here. He had 1 forced fumble, 4 INTs, 11 pass breakups, 31 tackles. The dude was all over the place, and he was special on both sides of the ball this year. He definitely deserves some recognition as one of the best DBs in the country. And then Noel Williams has been absolutely incredible this year for Cal. Obviously, didn't have the team success that some of these other guys have had, but 50 tackles, 8 pass breakups, 7 INTs on the year. The dude is absolutely remarkable. He was all over the place in that back end and was a huge reason that Cal was able to stay in some of the games that they probably had no business staying in. Remarkable player and definitely made a ton of plays for Cal this year, but Jahdae Barron's the winner. He was absolutely dominant on the outside as a corner and played just about every single position you could possibly need him to play, was elite in run support, was all over the place, and one of the best instinctual players I've seen in the entire country. Really, really good player. He is my Jim Thorpe Award winner. Probably the biggest gap, as far as I'm concerned, in these awards is this one with Jahdae Barron winning the Jim Thorpe. Davey O'Brien Award going to the best quarterback in the country, and there are a lot of really good quarterbacks here, guys. I mean, you talk about Shedeur Sanders has done an incredible job. Frankly, you can make the argument he should be in NYC right about now. 39 total touchdowns, only 8 picks, almost 4,000 yards passing. The dude's remarkable. It's incredible to watch him play. He will be the number one quarterback off the board in the NFL draft, and got to imagine he's going to find his way to Las Vegas one way or the other. Dillon Gabriel has been incredible this year. Obviously, a little bit over 3,000 yards total, 35 total touchdowns, only 6 picks, has been incredible this year. And then I got to give love to Bryson Daly. He's led one of the best offenses in the country. I fully understand that you love to see those big passing stats. The reality is quarterback's about executing the offense, and no one executed much better than Bryson Daly does. 37 total touchdowns, only 1 INT, was a really remarkable player running the football, obviously, for Army, and definitely one of the guys that deserves a little recognition here. But Cam Ward was setting the pace pretty much from the get-go this season when he went into Gainesville and absolutely set that place on fire. He was the one setting the pace, has over 4,000 passing yards, 40 touchdowns, 7 picks. The dude is incredible. It's been awesome to watch him go to work, and definitely the guy that I would have as the Davey O'Brien Award, and you'll probably see him in NYC if I had to imagine. Doak Walker Award finalist. This is probably my favorite award of the bunch because I love me a good running back. But we'll start with Dylan Sampson. He was not a finalist in the when they put out the finalists, I believe, about a week ago. Crazy. A very, very talented player, led that Tennessee offense for the vast majority of the year, frankly, and had 22 touchdowns, almost 1,500 yards. Remarkable player. Cam Skattebo obviously deserves to be in this conversation. Over 1,500 yards, over 2,000 yards total with 500 receiving, had 22 total touchdowns. The dude is absolutely remarkable, and like Dylan Sampson, was the offense for Arizona State for some of this year when Sam Leavitt went out with an injury. Omarion Hampton, an absolutely remarkable player, second in the country in rush yards with 1,660, 15 touchdowns on the ground, added a little bit in the receiving game, 373 and 2 touchdowns. But the answer is Ashton Jeanty. I don't think we have to waste too much time here. That's the best running back in the country. That is one of the best players in the country, and he ran away with this award, no doubt about that. The Biletnikoff, the one that a lot of people are questioning, a lot of people have bounced around a lot in, and frankly, for this one, it was easy to me. I'll be totally honest, but we'll start with everyone else. We'll start with Xavier Restrepo. He was huge. He's been an incredible, incredible player to watch, one of the best pure route runners in the entire country. Him and Cam Ward's connection has been incredible to watch develop this year. Had over 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns, really, really talented player, and definitely one of those guys that you will see in the NFL for quite some time to come. Speaking of the NFL, T-Mac is likely going to be the number one wide receiver off the board. If you include Travis Hunter as kind of a hybrid athlete, I suppose. He will be the first pure wide receiver off the board, and he was remarkable this year. Over 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns on the year, was the offense for Arizona when they had one. It was pretty much number 4 making plays or just about nothing else. And then Travis Hunter obviously should be on this list, 15 total touchdowns, over 1,100 yards, but the reality is, if you have a Triple Crown winner, you are giving it to the Triple Crown winner, and that is Nick Nash. 104 catches, 1,300 or almost 1,400 yards, 16 touchdowns on the year. He was an absolute beast at San Jose State, and that's the best wide receiver in the country. Period. End of story. I'll leave it at that. I feel very confident in this pick. It is Nick Nash as the Biletnikoff winner for me. And then the big one, the Heisman. The finalists to me are Ashton Jeanty, Cam Ward, Cam Skattebo, and Travis Hunter. Those are the 4 guys that I think have stood out the most. Frankly, if I had it my way, I'd probably just send the first 2. I'd probably just send Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty, have us celebrate them the entire day, and that be that. But I do love these other 2 guys. Cam Ward's had an incredible year, led the best offense in the country, has been one of the biggest stories. Cam Skattebo has been the offense for Arizona State for much of the year, has been one of the most impactful players in the country, and that's why they're in the playoff right about now. And then, obviously, Ashton Jeanty, the season has been historic. There's no other way to put it. He has a chance to break Barry Sanders' record in the playoff if he can get over, I believe, 130 or so yards when he does play whoever he does play in the second round. But it's Travis Hunter. It's unlike anything that I've ever seen. It's unlike anything that I thought was possible on a football field. 15 touchdowns on the offensive side of the ball, 4 interceptions, 11 pass breaks on the defensive, and it's not just snaps, guys. He's been absolutely remarkable to watch. He's one of the best wide receivers, one of the best corners in the country. He is the best player in the country. He deserves the Heisman. any other year, I would be picking Ashton Jeanty. When you have a guy like Travis Hunter, I just got to lean in that direction. So those are my picks. It was very, very tough to put all this stuff together, especially for some of those, like the Doak Walker Award. Finding the finalists is not an easy thing to do. I know who the winner was going to be, but finding the finalists was very, very tough. The Heisman, I went back and forth a ton, I'll be totally honest with you, but landed on Travis Hunter, feel pretty good about that. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. One of the biggest storylines as we head into this thing is how much is Arch Manning going to play for Texas, and we'll break it down, some of the issues they've had and what he can bring to the table right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. I just gave out all of my postseason awards, got to the Heisman. I am going to go Travis Hunter for that, but it should be as close as any Heisman that I can remember. Two remarkable players, and if we could just send those two to New York City, I'd be more than fine with that. But let's get into a little talk around Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, because this is the big question. As we head into the playoff, there's not a few questions that are more important than this one right here around the Texas Longhorns. And let's jump into this because there's a lot of different things that are going into this. Some of it is reality, some of it not so much. Some of it is a little bit made up by some people out there, but the reality is there are some questions around that quarterback position as we head into the CFP. Do they stick with Quinn Ewers? Do they entirely flip to Arch Manning? How much is Arch Manning a part of the game plan? A lot of different things are being thrown out there, but before we jump into what I think they could possibly do to some of the solutions as far as I see it, let's get into some of the issues that Texas has been facing over the last, really the entire year, but particularly since Quinn Ewers has gotten injured. It's been a little bit of an issue for them all year, and it starts with red zone inefficiency. They have been really, really bad in the red zone, especially towards the back end of this season. They're 93rd in the country when it comes to red zone efficiency, and when you look at the plays inside the Georgia 25-yard line, by the way, huge shout out to CJ Vogel for a lot of the stats that I'm going to use here, because he definitely broke this down in great detail, was very, very helpful to kind of break this down this issue a little bit better. But they had 14 plays inside the Georgia 25-yard line on Saturday. Really, really good. You know, you want as many plays as possible. 2 penalties for negative 25 yards, 2 run plays for 10 yards, 10 pass plays for 0 yards. Those pass plays went 2 for 9, 5 yards, and a sack for negative 5 yards. They were ahead of the chains, quote unquote, on 2 of those 14 snaps. That can't happen. That can't be a reality that you're living in. There's very, very few quarterbacks. There's probably no quarterbacks in the college football world that will succeed with that. There's no world where you're going to be able to stay behind the chains that often, have that many penalties. And yes, you were able to run the ball 2 times for 10 yards. The reality is some of those were after penalties. Some of those were on third down to get in place for a field goal. You're in a position where you do not have confidence in your run game when you get into the red zone. That is a problem. That is something that Quinn Ewers can't necessarily fix, and that is something that Quinn Ewers is going to take the fall for, because he's going to be the guy that has to make essentially all the plays. When they get into the red area, they have to be better at running the ball. They have to stay in front of the sticks. They cannot shoot themselves in the foot with penalties, or they're going to be in a lot of trouble when they get into that red area, and Clemson's going to beat them, plain and simple. If they do not get this fixed up at least a little bit going into that game, Clemson's going to take full advantage, and Dabo Swinney is going to be fully ready for what that red zone inefficiency brings. He's going to be ready on the other side to make sure they are efficient in that red zone. So this is probably the biggest issue for Texas. If they do not get this fixed, they will lose very early in this tournament, whether it's Clemson, whether it's Arizona State, or maybe you make it to the quarterfinal or the semis and then you lose to an Oregon or an Ohio State. But the reality is you got to get this fixed one way or another. And then you do have a consistent run game problem. You haven't been able to get it going really nearly as much as you want to. It felt like it was heading in the right direction in the Arkansas, Kentucky, and A&M games. And then in Georgia, you went 2.52 yards per rush, excluding sacks, obviously, on Saturday, and your average distance on third down was 11.6 yards. You're not going to be able to succeed if you cannot get that run game rolling downhill, particularly on first and second down, and be able to set yourself up with 5 yards to go on third down, with 4 yards to go on third down, because that's when Quinn Ewers can really go to work. That's when Quinn Ewers is outright special and one of the better quarterbacks in the entire country. If you can keep him in front of the sticks with your run game, he can do really, really special things and lead you to a national title by himself, if I'm being totally honest. The question is, can you get that without adding Arch-Manning to the mix, without getting more numbers in the run game with that? Another big-time issue has been protection. It has been something that this is one of the best O-lines in the country. There's no doubt about that. They have been really, really good for about 95% of the season. And then you play Georgia, and you get absolutely dominated. You give up 13 sacks and 25 tackles for loss in 2 games. It just can't happen. And some of that is Quinn Ewers' mobility. Some of that is his, injury to his ankle. A lot of that, plays into all this stuff. Some of that is just the offensive line missing assignments. So this is the one, to me, in the grand scheme of things for the playoff, I'm probably least worried about, at least in terms of the offensive line, because I know that's a very good unit. I know that Georgia presents something that they obviously really, really struggle with, but pretty much no one else has throughout the entire year. They've been able to be very, very efficient throughout the year, and I tend to believe they will be fine on the offensive line. Will Quinn Ewers' mobility put him in tough positions? That's another question to be asked, and definitely something that kind of plays into this equation. And then, obviously, the protection issues lead to turnovers. You're going to have turnovers when you have protection issues, particularly with a guy like Quinn Ewers that does struggle with his footwork at times, does struggle to get his feet under him to release the ball the way that he wants to. In this pick right here with Dalen Everett late in that game against Georgia, the offensive lineman gets pushed back into his lap. He's not able to step into that throw. It kind of floats out there, and Dalen Everett makes a play on it. So you're in a position where you don't have the most mobile quarterback in the world. You're not in a position where you are in a position where he is going to make mistakes when he's under pressure, when he's in tough situations, and you just can't have that. In a playoff format where you have so many teams that are so efficient offensively and are so willing to take chances that you give them and take full advantage of them, you cannot give them as many chances as Quinn Ewers gave Georgia on Saturday, as he's given a couple other teams throughout the year. He had an INT he's had an INT in the last 2 games. He had 3 games with no INTs before that. So that's the question. He has 3 touchdowns and 4 INTs when under pressure, 22 touchdowns and 5 INTs when he is fully clean. You got to keep him clean. You got to make sure that the pressure does not get there. He's got to be better about moving in the pocket. And then when he does release a ball, he cannot release it off weird footing. That is something that continues to happen with him. And if it does continue to happen, there are going to be picks by Clemson. There are going to be big plays by Clemson. And then you might just come out on the wrong side and be heading home in the very first round of this playoff. So this is probably the biggest thing. I talked about it when we were heading into this game against Georgia. If Texas can take care of the football during this tournament, they can they can absolutely win the national title. They have that ability. They have the defense to do it. They have to make sure they don't put their defense in bad spots. They did on Saturday. They cannot do it throughout this tournament, or they're going to be in a terrible, terrible place in that Clemson game or possibly that Arizona State game if they're able to get through Clemson. And then finally, the biggest one, or not the biggest one, but one of them is explosive pass plays. It was not nearly as good as you wanted it to be. He has one of the lowest average depth of target in the entire power forward as Quinn Ewers. Some of that is just what Sark's offense is. Dylan Gabriel's also all the way down there, so not like this is necessarily crazy news, but it's definitely something that you want to get fixed. It's definitely something that you want to test more people deep downfield, because 34.1 completion percentage on 20 plus yard passes downfield. On Saturday, he was 8 for 17 with 2 interceptions on passes beyond 10 yards downfield. it can't happen. It needs to be a little bit better. Some of that is protection. Some of that is just Quinn Ewers has to make better balls. He has to hit his receivers in stride. He has to be a lot better about pushing the ball downfield and doing it with a lot of confidence. He made a couple of really incredible throws against Georgia, especially this one to Matthew Golden, but he's got to do it more often. They got to be able to scheme that stuff up, and a lot of that does have to do with the run game, having to be a little bit bigger of a factor, pull those safeties and linebackers down into the box, and then you can throw over top of them. A lot of this kind of plays together. So that's kind of the big question here is, how much of this is really on Quinn Ewers? How much of this sits firmly on his shoulders, and how much of this is just kind of an amalgamation of a million different things? So for me, the mobility is a very real issue. There's no doubt about that. The offensive line, there have been times, even in that first Georgia game, there was a sack where I believe Jalen Walker, late in that game near the end zone, Quinn Ewers needed to step up in the pocket. There was an open pocket for him to step up, move to the left, and make a throw. When he doesn't do that, he puts himself in really tough positions. He throws things flat-footed. He floats passes. INTs happen. One almost happened against Georgia in this exact scenario where he just didn't get his feet under him. He just didn't fully set his feet. It was not necessarily where the ball needed to be and almost got picked. It was dropped, obviously, but he puts it in harm's way far too often when he has those mobility issues. So that is a problem. There's no doubt about that. The O-line also needs to hold up their end of the bargain. They have not necessarily done that quite as much in the run game as you would like. They've missed a couple of different pass pro things that you definitely cannot miss in the playoff, and it's definitely something that if you're not going to have a successful O-line, you're not going to have a successful offense, plain and simple. And then the deep balls are a conversation. There's no doubt about that. You're going to have to stretch the field just a little bit during this tournament. It doesn't necessarily need to be 10 times per game. It doesn't need to be beating them over the top every single play. You do need to make them respect it a little bit more, because right now they don't really respect your run game. They don't really respect the deep ball. They're being able to play everything pinned in, everything from 10 yards in. That makes it relatively easy for these very talented, very good tacklers to go in and make those plays on these really talented pass catchers, but you're putting them in situations where they're catching the ball and they're looking downfield to 10 defenders right in front of them. So there's a lot of different things that do sit on Quinn Ewers' shoulders. There are certain things that he does that does hurt this offense, whether it's his mobility, some of that is injury-based, some of that is just who he is as a quarterback. Some of it is the O-line not being quite as good in big-time moments as they need him to be, the run game not being very consistent, some play-calling issues in the red zone area has been a big factor in this. So not all of this is on Quinn Ewers. I can promise you that. There is some that is on Quinn Ewers, no doubt about it, and he does need to be better. But the reality is he is a quarterback that if you give him good protection, if you give him a run game, he will be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. If all of that starts to break down and pressure starts to get home, things turn sour really, really quickly. So it really just comes down to that offensive line, that run game being able to step up. Now, you need a little bit of help for that. You might need a little bit of help to figure out all of those issues. So what does Arch-Manning bring to the table that Quinn Ewers just doesn't quite? The biggest thing to me is run game numbers. When you talk about the run game in college football, really in any level of football, you are looking at a numbers game inside the box and in your backfield. Whether or not if you have 5 blockers and they have 6 guys in the box, you want to make sure you have 7 guys that could possibly take the ball or possibly be blocking on the play. So let's say it's a read option with Trey Wisner and Arch-Manning. That linebacker has to think for one more second, is Arch-Manning going to pull this ball? Is Arch-Manning going to pull it, run around me, and go for 66 yards like he does on this very play that I have right here? But he's a very, very talented runner. He will make all of those linebackers, all of those safeties come down into the box, make sure they respect the run game with him, and then other run lanes will open for these running backs, and then he will be able to make a couple of plays with his legs. So that's a huge part of this. He does bring run game numbers. He does bring an athleticism that Quinn Ewers just doesn't have. That's just not part of his game. He has plenty of other things that he does way better than what Arch-Manning does, but the athleticism part of this is a huge part and definitely something that can factor into what Texas can do offensively in this thing. And then you do have the deep ball potential. He's been absolutely incredible, pushing the ball down the field, 8 for 18, 327 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 INT on 20-plus yard passes, 11 for 18, 228 yards. He had 6 touchdowns, 1 INT on 10-plus yards passes. remarkable player. He obviously has an ability to push the ball down the field. The arm talent is absolutely incredible and definitely something that he brings to the table. So it can't just be run plays. It can't just be, oh, number 16's coming in, so let's pack into the box and let's make sure we defend the run. You got to diversify it, and that deep ball is definitely something that he can diversify it with. So my idea, and I want to make it very clear before I get into my idea, I have not called football. I am not Steve Sarkisian. I am not anywhere near Steve Sarkisian. He has forgotten more about the sport than I will ever know. The reality is, I think everyone can watch this team and see something is missing on offense, and something is just a little bit off. There needs to be more packages for Arch Manning in the CFP. If you think Arch Manning should be the starter for this team, I'm sorry, you're just wrong. Quinn Ewers gives them the best chance to win the national title. You have to utilize Arch Manning, though. I don't know if that's a 70-30 split, an 80-20 split, especially in the red zone. I would utilize him a little bit more to get numbers in the run game. A lot of different things to kind of take into effect here. The reality is you got to see Arch Manning more. Number 16 has to come on the field a little bit more often. The run game has to utilize him to get a couple of openings for these running backs, to get this offensive line to get pushing downfield. And then utilize that arm. Let him rip the ball downfield a couple of times, make those safeties worried about the run game, and then let him pull one back and absolutely let one rip. Quinn Ewers should still be the leader. Quinn Ewers is the outright leader of this team. Benching him would almost guarantee that you do not win a national title. But you got to get Arch Manning in there. You have to diversify that quarterback position. And if you don't, you're probably in a position where you're coming up short against another elite team in Oregon or Ohio State when you get to that semifinal, or maybe even a little bit earlier. So this is going to be the thing that decides this tournament for Texas one way or the other. How they handle this situation, how much Arch Manning gets into the game, how they utilize him, all of that stuff. It is an absolute tightrope walk. It is going to be incredibly tough for Steve Sarkisian to do, but he's got to do it. If he wants to win a national title, this is a must. There's no two ways about that, and it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out. But we'll take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to get to some coaching carousel updates, including one around UNC and Bill Belichick that I'm still having trouble figuring out. But we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning debate. I gave my ideas for how they could possibly utilize that. It's going to be really tough. It is an absolute tightrope walk, but you got to see number 16 in there more. Obviously gives you a little bit more athletic ability, a little bit more ability to push the ball down the field. Texas is going to need that at some point throughout this tournament. But let's get to the coaching carousel, because what is happening over at Chapel Hill? There is a lot of different chatter around Bill Belichick and that UNC job, and definitely a lot of things that I know are a thing in college coaching hires. I've never seen it like this. I've never seen it quite as open as this one has been. So let's go ahead and jump into this thing. Ollie Conley, a reporter for Guardian as well as the Read Optional, reported that Bill Belichick has agreed to become the next head coach of the UNC Tar Heels, but UNC has not agreed yet. And I know that sounds crazy, but here's the reality of the plan, or here's the short term of the plan. It sounds like he dropped off a 400-page Bible, as they're calling it. A lot of different names to throw out there. It is essentially just a plan for what he wants to do when he gets to UNC. It goes into NIL and how he wants to get much more investment in that respect. He wants to hire 2 different staffs, one for coaching, one for recruiting, which is kind of a thing that happens around college football right about now. Obviously something that is already sort of happening around UNC. And then the big one that a lot of people are talking about is it sounds like he possibly wants Steve Belichick to take over after a few years, be the sitting head coach as he is, leading the team. Steve will be ready to roll whenever Bill Belichick moves on to the next level. he does want to go to the next level. That is the end-all, be-all of this thing. He wants to be an NFL head coach, but as of right now, he wants to coach football. So he's trying to get back into the game. He's trying to get into the college level, and then probably set up his son Steve for a very successful time while he's at UNC. So it adds a lot of questions. There's no doubt about that. It is a very, very confusing ask. It's one of those things that I think a lot of people are putting forward saying, how could Bill Belichick ask for all of this stuff? Who does he think he is? All of that different type of stuff. But the reality is, this is normal. To a certain extent, this is normal in the sense that a lot of these coaches that take these big-time jobs, whether it's UNC or it's UCF here in a bit, or it's a lot of different schools that are open right about now, they're not going to have necessarily demands, quote-unquote. They are going to have asks. They are going to have certain things that they want be done before they get there, like more investment in NIL, like ability to go into the transfer portal a little more aggressively, like possibly a recruiting coordinator and some of the GM and all of these different things that are new to college football. People are still trying to build those things out. When you do take a new job, you do want those reassurances. So that makes total sense to me. That's not necessarily a new thing in college football. That has been around for a very long time. I've never quite heard it called a Bible before, but at the end of the day, it's not crazy for someone to have quote-unquote conditions of what their job would look like if they were to take it. Here's the thing about this, and it was something that Josh Pate was talking about when he was talking about this a couple of days ago, and he just said, what does this bring? What is the new thing that Bill Belichick brings to UNC that they have not had there before? Because the reality is, this idea of having a coaching and recruiting staff, that's already a thing. That's been a thing at every single university across the country for the last couple of years. That is not necessarily new. That is not necessarily going to innovate UNC to another level. The NIL investment. Go ahead and ask Texas how much ground you have to make up in the NIL world. Go ahead and ask Oregon how much ground you have to make up in the NIL world, and the UNC people will say, probably can't do that in a couple of years. That's the reality of this situation. UNC, you're in great shape. I'm not saying that you can't compete with some of these teams in terms of NIL. You got the money, you got the people to do it. There's no doubt about that. But the reality is, are you willing to spend to that degree? Are you willing to go toe-to-toe with guys like Texas, with guys like Oregon, and bid millions of dollars on these very, very talented quarterbacks, very, very talented players all around the country? Is that something that can happen essentially overnight over at UNC? They've already started the fundraising process. Obviously, they've done a relatively good job of doing that. But this is a new coach. He's going to have to build relationships. He's going to have to get everything in place. He's going to have to make sure that these boosters are fully on board, and that's not an easy thing to do. That's not an overly easy thing to do, especially for a coach that is coming down from the NFL level, a coach that, whether we like it or not, some people don't love the attitude of Bill Belichick. I tend to lean towards it, but the reality is there's quite a few people that don't love the way that he carries himself. There's a lot of things that are going to have to happen for this to really go off without a hitch, is kind of what I'm trying to say here. There's so many different hurdles that he's going to have to get over, hurdles that he's been able to get over in the NFL level, no doubt about that. He's incredible at building a group, at putting together a staff, at staying under the salary cap, at doing all of that stuff. Everyone's good at doing all that stuff. Texas is good at doing that. Georgia's good at doing that. Bama's good at doing that. Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, all of those teams are incredibly good at playing the professional football game. You don't need to go hire Bill Belichick to change the way that you go about your business to become a professional style football or college football program. You can just hire a guy that's already in college football, because that's what college football is now. You don't have to bring a guy down because no one understands what's going on. Everyone's running around trying to figure out how to make this work. People have it figured out. Texas has it figured out. Oregon has it figured out. Pretty much everyone around the country has it figured out. It doesn't need to be Bill Belichick that fixes everything. All of that being said, I've said all of my piece there. I don't necessarily think it is the greatest thing in the world. I think it's something that could possibly put them on path to be a dominant force in college football. I think it could put them in a hole that they could never get out of as well. It's one of those type of hires. I think it is a huge risk-reward type proposition. That being said, the guy can coach football. Let's just be totally honest. He is one of the best, maybe the best football coach that has ever lived. He is a guy that absolutely will get winning football out of you. The question is, will he get winning football out of you for extended periods of time? I'd be a little bit surprised. And you're adding money to a world where you're already going to have to spend $22 million here in a second on revenue sharing. It's just a big ask. I don't know if this is going to happen. I think if it did happen, it would be a very, very interesting thing to watch. Not necessarily saying it wouldn't work. I'd be a little bit skeptical of it working, but at the end of the day, it would be fascinating to watch. It would definitely be one of those things that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on, and it would be fascinating to see him in that Carolina blue. It sounds like a decision is coming on this relatively soon, so we will keep you updated as it does, but this is going to be weird. I can almost promise you that. But let's move on from this. Let's get to all the other updates. And Barry Odom, the head coach of UNLV, has taken the job at Purdue. He will be the new head coach there. Really remarkable coach. Definitely a guy that is really, really talented and probably going to be a guy that can utilize the portal pretty effectively. Did it really well at UNLV and absolutely is going to have to do it this time around at Purdue. UCF got Scott Frost. They got him back. The prodigal son does return to Orlando, and Mackenzie Milton's going to be right there with him. As the quarterback coach, they have hired Mackenzie Milton as well as Scott Frost to be the head coach. This is just cool. I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if it's going to fall into place the way that they want him to, but this is going to be an awesome storyline to watch as we head into 2025 in the college football year. Cal has hired their offensive coordinator, and it is Brian Harsin. Brian Harsin is back in college football after a unceremonious exit at Auburn, but the reality is, very, very talented offensive mind, did a great job at Boise State, did an okay job at Auburn for a little bit there with the offense, but definitely a guy that can do a really great job, and it'll be interesting to see what that Cal team looks like with Fernando Mendoza likely at quarterback this time around next year. Going to the G5 level, Southern Miss has made their hire. It is Charles Huff. That was a really weird saga over the last couple of weeks, but it is officially set in stone, and Marshall has made their hire in Tony Gibson as the new head coach. He was the defensive coordinator at NC State, did a great job there. Definitely a guy that I think can be very successful at Marshall. But that was a very weird exit. There's no doubt about that, but both those teams have their guys, and we'll see what happens from here in terms of staffing and players moving around from those two schools. App State has made their hire as well. Dow Loggins is going to be the new head coach of the Mountaineers, and great hire, no doubt about that. The job that he did with Lenora Sellers over the last couple of years has been absolutely incredible to watch. He's done an incredible job getting talent into that place, and I have to assume App State's going to have a really cool, really fun offense that, given the right quarterback, can be really special at that group of 5 level. Charlotte has made their hire as well. Tim Albin, the old Ohio coach, is going to be the new head coach of the Charlotte 49ers. Really talented guy, obviously coming off a MAC title with Ohio. Definitely someone that is going to be really successful at Charlotte, and really excited to see what the next step is for this coach. I think he could be very successful and possibly in the Power 4 here pretty shortly. Moving over to some rumors around some open jobs. West Virginia, it sounds like it could be Rich Rod. It sounds like Rich Rod might just be coming right back around the bend. There's a couple other coaches that are involved in this thing, and obviously it sounds like we'll get pretty soon news, probably by the end of this week, it was what it sounds like. But as of right now, it sounds like Rich Rod might be coming home. That would be incredible to watch, and definitely would be a very interesting storyline in 2025. UNLV, they just moved on from Barry Odom. They already got the guy in building. It is going to be Brennan Marion, if I had to imagine. If they let him leave, I'd be shocked. He's a remarkable coach. He probably won't be there for long, if I had to imagine, as the head coach, because there's going to be a lot of Power 4 coaches that are going to want this guy. He's remarkably talented. The offense that he runs is innovative and really fun, and I think he's a guy that continues to rise. Looks like he's going to rise to a head coaching position at the place that he's already at. Tulane gets to hold on to one of my favorite coaches in the entire country in John Sumrall. They agreed to a new contract for him, a bigger salary pool for his staff, revenue sharing going to be a big part of this, a lot of different stuff going into this, kind of like the Bill Belichick thing we just talked about. Some conditions were met for John Sumrall. He is sticking around New Orleans, and that's going to be a team in 2025, I can promise you that, even without Darian Mensah on the way. Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy. This was a weird situation last week, no doubt about that. They were in a weird little standoff between, they wanted to give him a little bit of a less of a salary. He was not having much of that, but it sounds like they've come to an agreement. Sounds like there's going to be much more in NIL. The OC and DC hires will decide how good this is going to end up being. Plain and simple, they did not hit last time. They're going to have to hit this time around. And speaking of coordinators, Chip Lindsey is going to be the new coordinator for Michigan at offensive coordinator. He had an elite offense in 2023 with UNC. Very different offense from what Michigan has right now. Still runs the ball very effectively. Omarion Hampton, obviously a big part of that offense, but definitely a guy that can push the ball down the field. Him and Bryce Underwood will be a very interesting fit next year. So a lot of stuff happening around the coaching carousel. That Bill Belichick news is about as confusing as I've ever seen in the college football world, but we'll try to make sense of it. We'll try to give you an idea of what's happening. It could possibly break today, could break tomorrow, could just go off into the ether, and then they hire someone totally different. So we'll update you on all of that stuff as it happens, but let's take our third break. And when we come back, we got to talk about the month of December and the teams that need to dominate it. A lot of teams that are looking in the portal, a lot of teams that are looking all over the place. We'll talk about what they need right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the coaching carousel and the big news around UNC and Bill Belichick. Very confusing, and we will update you on it as it unfolds. Feels like a decision could be coming today or tomorrow, so we'll definitely see what happens there. Going to be very interesting, one way or the other, no doubt about that. But let's get into this month of December. It is the most confusing time in college football by a fairly comfortable margin. Even in the middle of the season, it's a little bit less confusing than what December is because you got a million things happening. You have the portal, you have recruiting, you have trying to keep your guys in your building. You have obviously a bowl game coming up for a lot of these teams. So let's get into the teams that really stand out to me. There's obviously a lot more on this list, but in terms of where I'm standing, the teams that just have to be all over the place this year, it starts with the Michigan Wolverines. I think everyone understands this. This is the start of the Michigan transformation because you have the new quarterback. You have Bryce Underwood. Chip Lindsey is going to be your new offensive coordinator. The reality is a lot of stuff is going to change. That offense is going to have to fundamentally change in the way that operates. Obviously, you still want to be physical. You still want to be forceful at the line of scrimmage, and I tend to believe they'll still be able to do that. Bryce Underwood wants to throw the ball around. Bryce Underwood also wants to be a running threat in the game, so he is going to be a huge factor in the way they build out this offense and the way that they go get players in. They got to go get some wide receivers. They have to go load up on some elite wide receivers. There are some dudes out there. They need to start getting on the phone and see if they can find a couple of those guys. They also have to replace those two defensive tackles, and Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, two huge contributors, two huge reasons that defense was not all the way off a cliff this year, frankly. There was a lot of issues with that defense, particularly on the back end, but that front seven really kept them in the hunt for a lot of this year. Also, Will Johnson's out the door. Your best coverage corner, in my opinion, the best coverage corner in the entire country, is walking out the door. You got to figure out what you're going to do there. So a lot of stuff has to happen here in terms of personnel. There are quite a few gaps in terms of personnel on that roster. You just got to find new guys. You got to go out and be very aggressive. I assume Michigan will be one of the most active teams, probably both into and out of their program over the next month or so. Definitely will be a huge little bit for Jerome Moore. And then you got to get the new kid in there, and you got to see what you can do in 2025. Going to be a huge year, but the Michigan that you knew is kind of changing, at least offensively, and we'll see if this next month can kind of kickstart them into that. Oklahoma, you're staring down the barrel. There is no doubt about that. They're in a really, really interesting spot because the roster crisis is very real. They are losing guys left and right in the portal, particularly a ton of wide receivers from that wide receiver core. I believe Deion Burks might be the only pass catcher still around there, if I'm being honest. But Jackson Arnold, obviously out the door. That was expected by just about everyone around there. Danny Stutzman and a ton of other top defenders are off to the NFL. You got to be really active in the portal. You have to go out and get guys. They did a relatively good job pulling in a good high school class, but you need wide receivers, and you need them very, very badly. This is a very deep group. This is a group that you absolutely can get a couple from and be very successful, but the reality at the end of all of this, if you make all the right decisions, if you hit all the right buttons, you're probably going to have a very, very new defense. You're going to have an entirely new wide receiver core. You're going to have a new quarterback. You're probably going to need to get a lot of new offensive linemen. It's going to be tough. They have the ability to bounce back next year, get to 9-8 wins, something like that. But the reality is you got to hit the right buttons in the next month. And even if you do that, the work is still very much ahead of you, and it's definitely going to be really tough. Oklahoma is always going to be a team that can bounce back and have a huge year. But when you look at that roster right now, there is a lot of work that needs to be done in the next month. And then you got to really get to work to make sure that everything falls into place the way that you want it to. The guy that Brent Venables' actually old boss, Dabo Swinney, you need to get active. One way or the other, you need to get active. There have been a couple of different players that have said they've gotten calls from Clemson throughout the transfer portal. It has to be more, just plain and simple. This is a very talented team, and frankly, they're returning a ton of really, really young talent next year. Whether it's the 2 wide receivers in Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore, K. Klubnik will be back next year, a couple of defenders that will absolutely be huge. The reality is you need more, because if you do not go into the portal, if you do not get active, if you do not get the players that you very much need, it's probably the last time we'll see Clemson on the national stage for a while, if I'm being totally honest. You have too many teams in that conference that are making big-time waves, that are starting to make moves, that are starting to get more talented and kind of close that gap between them and Clemson. They have to make sure that they widen it again. They have to make sure that they go out, get some big-time wide receivers, get a running back to take over Phil Moffa's spot, get a couple of defenders to take over some of the big-time spots that will be void after this year. So there's a lot of different things that have to happen over there. Obviously, they have a little bit more of that prerequisite, just elite talent all over the roster, where it's not quite as vital as some of these other teams, but when you look across that team right now, they're just not quite to that elite level. They're not quite to that national championship level. This month is where a lot of that stuff can change. There's no doubt about that. Miami is staring down a very interesting month because this was the year, and you came up short, just short of the CFP. You came up short of what you wanted to do, and there's a lot of outgoing talent. There's a lot of guys, particularly on offense, that are likely going to find their place elsewhere. Cam Ward off to the NFL, as Xavier Restrepo, likely Jacoby George, maybe he'll stick around. Elijah Arroyo almost definitely is out the door. You're almost definitely losing Francisco Mauanoa on the defensive side as well, the quarterback of that defense. So you got to find replacements. They have plenty of talented guys from the portal last year, as well as recruiting classes that they've been starting to bring in. So they have guys as a prerequisite. They have that foundation that they need, no doubt about that. But you're going to need some game changers. You're definitely going to need some game-changing defenders. When you look at that defense right now, it has to be attacked very aggressively in the portal. You have to find new guys to fill those gaps in. You got to find better guys, plain and simple. The defense just wasn't good enough. The personnel, especially up front, was just not good enough. They have to be much better. They have to start developing these young guys that are very talented, especially on the back end of that defense. It's one of those things that this could be a worse offense next year, a better defense, and they can make the playoff. It starts right now. You got to make sure that you get the right guys in there, and then you got to find Cam Ward's replacement somewhere in this mess. Sounds like it could be Malik Murphy, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail tomorrow. But definitely a lot of things that have to happen, and that's kind of the world that Mario Cristobal has chosen with the portal approach that he does have. Florida State, obviously they are going to be a part of the portal discussion. There's no doubt about that, but they were in the headlines for all the wrong reasons this year. They had one of the worst turnarounds that I've ever seen in all of my years of watching college football, and they need to get more involved in the high school ranks. You can't do that right now. You have to go get a portal class. You have to be able to turn this thing around next year, and then you can deal with the high school recruiting, and then you can get into really building this program out. It looks like Thomas Castellanos might be leaning in that direction right about now. It sounds like they're doing essentially all they can do to find a way to get him on campus and get him to be their quarterback. Very talented kid. A lot of people kind of raise their eyebrows at that. He is a Gus Malzahn quarterback, plain and simple. He fits that mold very, very well and would be a very interesting one, but I think could be a very successful one. Sounds like a couple of Nebraska defenders are trying to look that direction because Tony White, their defensive coordinator, made their way there. And then they just got to fill the cupboard with wide receivers. I know they're in for Barry and Brown. They're in for a couple other guys, but they got to get very, very active because this next month is going to decide Mark Norvell's future in Tallahassee. One way or the other, what guys he brings in this time around compared to what he brought in last year is going to make the decision. He brought in Malik Benson and DJU and I'm blanking on the last name, very talented players from the portal this past year. They weren't quite good enough. You got to get A-plus guys. You got to get guys that can take you to the CFP, that can get you back on the mountaintop. Really, really talented staff. Really, a lot of guys that I very much like on that team. You got to build it out, and you're losing guys kind of left and right. It's going to be a very busy month down there in Tallahassee. And then we'll move over to Gainesville. Why not? Florida is in launchpad mode as far as I'm concerned. They are in a position where you have DJ Lagway. You have finished the season really, really strong. You had nearly a top 10 class in recruiting. The portal is the final piece. The portal is the thing that can put everything into place. They have lost guys like Kaheem Jackson, a very talented corner for them. Jack Pryburn, a very talented edge rusher. They've lost both those guys, and they're going to have to find a way to replace them. Definitely a lot of work to do to just make sure you have the guys around DJ. he can take you to a CFP. I can almost promise you that. He has the talent to take you to a CFP. He has the talent to possibly win you a national title. You got to make sure you get the talent around him. You got to make sure that over the next couple of weeks, you get wide receivers, you get a lot of talent on defense, and you get this thing where it needs to be from a talent perspective going forward. Colorado, they're always going to be in change. That's just kind of what they do. They are a place of change, no doubt about it. And the portal just opened, so it's Colorado season. They need help on both sides of the ball with a lot of guys going all over the place. They just lost Dayon Hayes yesterday, I believe, to the portal. Definitely a tough loss. Really talented player coming off the edge for them. Obviously, the news is Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. Those two guys are out the door. It means that everyone else on this team has to be that little bit better. Those two guys made up for a lot of deficiencies on that team throughout the last couple of years. It cannot happen next year because those two guys will not be on the field. So you're going to have to find new guys to fill the gaps. If it is going to be Julian Lewis starting for you at quarterback, you're really going to need a lot of help at offensive line, at wide receiver, at all of the positions that just make his job a lot easier. You need some help at running back, a lot of different things that are going to happen around Colorado, as it does really every single time around this time of year. Deion did it last year. I have no reason to believe he can't do it this year, and he's leading for a lot of really talented guys that we'll talk about a little bit later, probably tomorrow, in a little bit more depth. LSU, this is going to be a huge one. Brian Kelly is officially on his last life. 2025 is the last chance to prove that he can bring a national championship to Baton Rouge. Doesn't mean he has to win a national championship next year, but you got to get to the playoff. You got to show that you can make those steps forward. You got to show that you are a coach that can get them to the promised land that LSU belongs in. Let's just be totally honest. That's one of the best programs in the country. They belong in the playoff, or at least in that conversation. They were not this year. So the talent at wide receiver that is going out the door just needs to be filled. We already had C.J. Daniels hit the portal. Kyron Lacey is going to go to the NFL. A lot of different moving parts here. So got to make sure you get that. The D-line, just stock to the gills. Get all of the guys you possibly can. Get all of the talent you possibly can. And then let Bo Davis and Kevin Peoples just work. They are incredible developers. They will get those guys ready to roll. And then the secondary, you have a lot of really young talent that I absolutely love. You got to backfill it with some really veteran guys that can make some plays. Definitely some guys out there, a couple of guys that are at the G5 level that I think could be hugely helpful to them. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, and definitely will be an interesting team. And then if Nussmeier comes back, this is a very capable team. You just got to hit the right buttons right now, and this next month is going to be huge for them and just about everyone else in the country. But especially those teams that I just listed, I feel like there's just a little bit added pressure. There's just a little bit more juice as you get into this month, and a lot of moves that have to be made. If they're not, you're going to come out on the wrong side in 2025. If they are, then you might just see a CFP team in 2025. So a lot of different questions, and a lot will be answered in the next month. We'll break it down as it does, obviously. But let's take our last break here. When we come back, let's rank the quarterbacks in the CFP field. I feel okay about this list. I love all these quarterbacks, so it was very, very hard to put together, but I'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the teams that just have to be active over the next month. Get a lot of guys in the portal. Make sure you backfill those positions because 2025 is going to be huge for a lot of these coaches, for a lot of these teams to prove that they can make it to the CFP in some way or another. But let's get to my quarterback rankings. We got the CFP rolling up. I want to make sure I get to essentially all my rankings. We'll probably do the coaches tomorrow if I had to be honest. So a lot of different things coming over the next little bit, but let's get into this. And this is a tough list to put together. I'll be totally honest. I love a lot of the guys on this list. They bring so many different skill sets to the table, and there's really not that dominant force in this group. There's not the Cam Ward. There's not the Shedeur Sanders. There's not the guy that is outright number one and no question about it. So a lot of different things to kind of go into here, and number 12 was probably the easiest of the bunch. No disrespect to Maddox Madsen, he is definitely the worst quarterback in this thing. Very capable, very talented player, especially with him expanding the run game throughout the year. He is someone that can make a lot of plays. The pass game, he's just not really a game changer. He can do the job, he can execute the offense, but if Ashton Jeanty is held under check, I don't think Maddox Madsen's going to go out there and win you a game. So a quarterback that can definitely do the job, that can play within his offense, can play relatively good football within his offense, but when it really comes down to it, I don't think he's going to outright win you a game. And kind of the way that I'm looking at this, just so everyone understands, it's who do I trust the most to outright lead my team in 4 straight games, to win a national title, to beat a lot of the elite teams that you're going to have to beat in the playoff? Who is the quarterback that in a vacuum I would take no matter what? Maddox Madsen would probably be the last one on this list, and then Gunnar Stockton would be 11, and this is all about experience to me. When you talk about the talent, it is off the charts. That is very, very clear. He is someone that I tend to believe is going to be fine. I may have picked Georgia to win the national title, so I think he's going to be more than fine. But there is going to be tons of adversity that he has not faced. There's going to be a ton of things that he has not looked at, and there's going to be a ton of things that are going to create problems for him. He's a very talented quarterback, and I think he will be more than fine in this tournament. But when I'm looking at these quarterbacks side by side, I can't necessarily lean into the guy that's going to be making his first start against Notre Dame here, or against Indiana or Notre Dame. Apologies to Hoosiers fans, to Indiana or Notre Dame here in a little bit. I just can't fully feel confident in that. I do think he's a very talented player and will be fine, but still a relative question mark here. This is the one that hurt me, because I really want Sam Leavitt to be higher on this list. I think I probably could slide him up a couple of spots if I'm being totally honest, but he's a special player. He has that moniker of a gamer as far as I'm concerned. He is the guy that if you need 8 yards, he's going to find a way to get you 8 yards, even if his arm falls off in the process. He's a very, very talented player. To me, the only difference here is experience. He's not necessarily been in these moments. He's not necessarily played at this level, and it's definitely going to be a big time adjustment. If Cam Scadaboo is totally stonewalled in one of these games, let's say they play Texas, and Cam Scadaboo goes for 40 yards rushing on 20 carries. Is Sam Leavitt going to be able to pick up the slack? Is my only question there. Very talented player. I could very well see him becoming one of the darlings of this thing and be in my top 5 rankings when we redo this thing at the end. But very talented player. I'm a little bit worried about the experience gap between him and some of the other players in this thing. Curtis Rourke here at 9. This is one of the more efficient passers in the entire country all year. Definitely a guy that not necessarily going to extend a ton of plays for you, make a couple of plays with his legs, but his ability to execute an offense is about as good as anyone in this group. He definitely can put the ball wherever you need it to be. He's a very, very efficient passer, very confident passer, and I think he's one of those guys that will just keep you in front of the chains. He won't make a ton of mistakes. He will dump the ball off when he needs to. That's absolutely huge. In games like this where you just need to take what's in front of you, need to take what the defense gives you, he is very, very good at that. I tend to believe he is a guy that absolutely can lead a team that might have to be a little bit more talented than Indiana is, but at the end of the day, can definitely lead a team to glory. Very talented player, and definitely just that experienced, steady hand that I would like at the wheel. Riley Leonard, kind of cut from the same cloth. He can make all the plays in the world. There's no doubt about that. I am worried about his ability to make that one huge throw that he is going to have to make at some point next Friday. I can almost promise you he's going to have to make a play throughout that game with his arm. He's very experienced. He's very smart. Can he rise to the moment when it's needed if that run game is shut down? Does he have the ability to take over a game with his arm and make all the plays that's necessary? I'd be a little bit surprised if I'm being totally honest. I really like Riley Leonard, but when I look at this offense, it's if you can run the ball, all well and good. If you can't, it could fall apart pretty quickly. Nico Iamaleava here at 7. I think he's probably the most talented quarterback in this entire thing. From a pure talent perspective, he's an absolute beast. He can do everything you possibly want him to do. He can absolutely extend plays with his legs. Kind of an underrated part of his game, honestly. Very, very talented player, and definitely a guy that can make defenses think about that part of his game. But the arm is where the money is made, no doubt about that. And when I look at this guy throw the football, it's one of those things where I don't care if it's 3rd and 15. I don't care if it's 3rd and 18. He can throw an absolute missile on the dime, on a dig, on a slant, on a post, whatever you need. He can put the ball where it needs to be. Now, he has been a little bit inefficient when it comes to throwing the ball downfield, and that's definitely a worry for me. But when you're talking about just executing a 2-minute drill and having to put the ball where it needs to be on out routes, on slants, on digs, on all of those different things, this is the guy that can absolutely do it. He has the highest ceiling of anyone in this thing. If he steps up and makes the plays downfield, this is a team that can win a national title with him at the helm. I can absolutely promise you that. The talent is ridiculous. He just got to put it all together at the right moment. Will Howard here at 6. This is the wild card to me as far as I'm concerned. There is some questions about his ability to step up to the moment to make the big plays down the stretch of a game because he struggled with that throughout this year. He made a couple of big-time plays against Penn State, also made a couple of big-time mistakes. So this is kind of the wild card, could go either direction. But when I look at this kid, he has so much experience. He feels like his mentality is exactly the way that you need it to be as you head into a tournament like this. I think he's a very confident guy, and I think he's someone that is just going to give you what you need. I think he's going to play very, very tough. I think that run game is going to be hugely important for Ohio State, and he's just that hard-nosed guy that I don't think is going to be denied in a lot of big-time moments here. I really like him. I understand there's some worries around him, no doubt about that, but when I look at this tournament, when I look at what you need, a lot of it is just about having a clear head. This guy has that. There's no doubt about that. Cannot wait to see what he can do in this tournament, and he very well could be the guy lifting the trophy at the end of this thing. Kevin Jennings is the most dynamic playmaker in this entire tournament at quarterback. He is absolutely incredible with his legs. He can do just about everything you need him to do, can make all types of throws, and when I talk about a guy that I think can lead me to 4 straight wins against elite opponents, if he has the guys around him, he can do just about anything you need him to do. He is so dynamic, he is so different, and he's one of those guys that you need to dance around and make a play on 3rd and 10. There's no one I'm picking before this kid. He is absolutely incredible to watch and definitely one of those guys that is a little bit of a wild card, definitely can make some mistakes here and there, but when I look at his entire season, he has only gotten better. The arm has only gotten more confident and more talented, and then the athletic ability is just different in every sense of the word. I would have Quinn Ewers here at 4. The criticism that Quinn Ewers has gotten a lot of times is very fair. To be totally honest, the other side of that, he is one of the most experienced, talented throwers of the football in the entire tournament. The dude can put the ball pretty much wherever you need it to be put. Down the field, it's a little bit of a worry, but when you have those digs, when you have those slants, when you have those out routes, that ball is coming out before the guy's broken. It's going to be on his chest, and it's going to be really, really accurate 9 times out of 10. Very, very talented quarterback. The mobility is definitely a concern for me, but if I'm in a 2-minute situation and I just need a guy to make anticipation throws, stay on schedule, be on target the majority of the time, I'm leaning toward Quinn Ewers. Very, very talented quarterback. The running is not going to be a factor for him necessarily. There's plenty that he can do with his arm in those big-time moments to make plays. Cade Klubnik, I would have here at 3, and this is one that some might question. The ability with this kid is absolutely ridiculous. He can do just about everything you need him to do on the football field, and I think he has some of those qualities that can just make him thrive in a single elimination type format that we have, and he did it in high school. He won multiple state championships, was a remarkable player in those games. He has a little bit of experience in this type of format. It's going to be interesting to see what he can do, and his legs are going to be a real factor. It was a huge factor for Clemson this year, especially if they don't have Phil Maffa against Texas. It's going to have to be a big factor, and when I look at this guy, he can make the deep ball passes, he can make all the passes in the world, and he has a little bit of ability to scoot. I really like Cade Klubnik. I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in this thing, and I think he's one that kind of create a little bit of a wild card and take the world by storm as we head into this thing. Drew Aller, this was very close between the number 1 and 2, but I have Drew Aller here. He might have the best ability of any quarterback in the CFP. He's absolutely remarkable. There's not a thing he cannot do with the football in terms of passing, and then he really can scoot. It's not necessarily the biggest part of his game, but he absolutely can run the ball. He absolutely can get out and make some plays with his legs when they're needed, but the reality is he can fit the ball into any window you want. He has probably the strongest arm of anyone in this thing, and when I look at this kid, he just gets better and better. As you watch him play, I'm really excited to see what he can do. He is someone that can take over a game. I really do think he has that in him. It'll be awesome to see if he has to do that and if he's able to do that when he does. So he's my number 2. Dillon Gabriel's my number 1. We talked about all this different stuff throughout this. We talked about poise. We talked about how important that's going to be, being experienced. We talked about having your legs, being able to run the ball. We talked about being pinpoint accurate when you need to, and we talked about going through your progressions and being very smart with the football. He does all of those things. He's very, very good. within the system, to be totally fair, but regardless, he is very good at getting the ball out of his hands very quickly, putting it on target. He's also can extend plays with his legs. He can make plays that way. He absolutely is someone that keeps the ball out of harm's way. He does everything that you could possibly want a guy to do in a single elimination tournament against some of the elite teams in the country. It's just about avoiding mistakes. It's just about making the play in front of you. It's just about doing the thing that makes the most sense at that very moment. Sometimes it's pulling the ball down and running. Sometimes it's just taking that little dump off to the running back. Sometimes it is ripping it deep and throwing that deep ball. And he, although not necessarily elite throwing that deep ball, absolutely has the ability to make those plays, absolutely can advance the ball down the field. And when I look at all of these quarterbacks, there's so many different things that all of these guys have. There's so many different variations of what they can do on the football field. Dillon Gabriel seems to have about all of them. He's very, very talented with his legs and his arm. He makes all the plays in the world, keeps the ball out of harm's way, and has that steady nature that you absolutely have to have in the playoffs. So ranking these quarterbacks was really tough. I love all of these guys. Sam Leavitt, as I'm looking at it right now, I'd love to bump him up to 8, maybe even 7. Very talented kid. I think a gamer-type player that could really thrive in this type of format. But I feel pretty good about the list that I have. I think Dillon Gabriel setting the pace, and then everyone else is pretty close behind him as far as I'm concerned. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every sport you could possibly want. So in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening. I will be back tomorrow to break down who exactly I think can actually win the national title from the CFP teams, my Navy Army breakdown, a lot of different things happening on tomorrow's show, so I will see you then.
Let's go.